Okay. So now, David, what about the new round of this, where I have seen some people say, perhaps plausibly, yeah, you guys are right, but as of 2014, this wouldn't have worked. Just the numbers don't add up in the amount of numbers.
Yeah.
But with the rise of AI now, which has the promise of greatly boosting the measured productivity of human labor and capital resources and whatever, like if U.S. GDP 20 years from now can be 10 times higher because now we're going to have a bunch of robots guided with ChatGPT-9 that can do just so much stuff. It actually, we physically could afford to only have like a smaller portion of the humans working full time, and we could have millions of people sitting in their modest apartments with VR goggles on, and they're just living in the metaverse. And and we have robots doing most of the stuff, and that like, so they're saying it all fits. That we're partly worrying, oh gee, isn't AI going to throw all these people out of work? Not just blue collar people, but even accountants and lawyers and whatever, as these AI LLMs get so much more sophisticated. So isn't this a nice thing? And you've seen many of these billionaire types coming out in favor of some version of UBI for precisely that reason, like to avoid a revolution, among other things. So how do you feel about that?
Well, let me just tell you, the way you set it up with GDP is 10 times higher in real terms.
Right.
Rarely, my numbers would be irrelevant.
Right.
Okay. Because you're taxing with our current tax rates a humongous, to use a technical term, amount of GDP. And so, I haven't worked out those numbers, but if it were 10 times higher, say 10 or 15 years from now, that could work. But here's the thing, then wait till we see that, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, that's not what's going on now. And by the way, my colleague at Hoover, Kevin Hassett, was on Larry Kudlow's show recently saying, look, the economy is doing pretty well. We are getting reasonable real growth. And he couldn't quite understand why, because you look at all these anti-growth policies that Biden has had. And he said, my best guess is it's AI, that firms are using it and becoming more productive, and that's what's going on. But notice that with that AI, what's happened to unemployment? Well, the unemployment rate came out this morning. I think it blipped up, but jobs increased substantially. So there are more people looking for work. And so when you have an unemployment rate that's 4% or less, I mean, when I was in graduate school, we thought of the natural rate of unemployment as being between 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. And when the unemployment rate is below the natural rate, then that would suggest that this isn't a problem. So my view is, when you think there's going to be a problem, wait until you have the problem. And if you don't get that real big increase in GDP, well, then that means AI wasn't as effective as you thought, which means those people are keeping their jobs. But beyond that, here's why I'm skeptical about AI causing people to lose jobs. Mm-hmm. It's not that could be wrong. It's not that could be right. It's not that couldn't be right.
Okay.
It's that we've seen this argument, we've seen this movie before. In 1900, 40% of the US labor force approximately was in agriculture. And what happened as agriculture got way more productive, people left agriculture and went into manufacturing. In the late 50s, the biggest percent of the labor force, manufacturing employment as a percent of the labor force, was at its peak. Then as manufacturing got way more productive, we lost jobs in manufacturing. What did they go into? Services. And so that's why it's just so hard to believe that somehow this time would be different. Could it be different? Yes, it could. I don't think it will be. But again, if it will be, and we get this huge increase in productivity, then let's talk about some kind of UBI then, but not now. Not now, when we're looking at potential $2 trillion deficits, or very close to, for the next number of years, when we've got Social Security, who President Biden assured us last night he's not going to change, when we've got that's going to hit a cliff of a different sort in 2033. That's not a long way off. Why do this now?
Okay, let me just see if I can repeat back the main points of what you just said. So on the one hand, just tackling the claim that's sort of taken as a given in certain quarters that, oh yeah, AI is cool and it's going to, it's making leaps and bounds in terms of productivity. But shoot, the downside is it's going to throw a lot of people out of work. And what are we going to do with these billions of unemployable people? And you're saying, as an economist, you don't think that's correct, or at least people need to give you more reason as to why is that true this time, because historically, every time there's been major innovations in the economy, it has changed the distribution of where the labor force is. And originally back in the 1800s, most of the U.S. labor force was or a lot of it was in agriculture, and then that shrunk, and it's fewer and fewer people were needed to harvest more and more food. It's not that U.S. agricultural output went down. It's just we got so much more efficient using tractors and fertilizers and all this stuff that you needed fewer people. And, that had been a mainstay. Like people, the family, the American farmer, and this is a great Thomas Jefferson, and da-da-da. And then they, but as of the 1950s, the big thing was manufacturing. And the mark of a strong country was, do you produce a bunch of stuff in factories? And then in America, was great in that. And then over time, the number of Americans in manufacturing went down. And so again,
as manufacturing output went up, by the way. Yes.
It's the same kind of pattern. And then now we're like, we have all these sophisticated people in, IT and this, legal services and accountants, and all these white collar workers are going to get thrown out of work by the AI. What are they going to do? And your point is they're going to do something.
Right.
And then, it'll just be so it's like, the machines now can do things to free up human labor to go do something else. So it's it's not an either or.
Right. Yes. And by the way, to look at manufacturing a minute, the last time I checked, I think our manufacturing output in real terms was 7% below its peak ever. And so this idea we don't produce things anymore is nonsense. We do. It's just we do it very, very efficiently.
Yep. Okay. And then the other thing you were saying is, even if the argument is true that this time really is different, you're saying, well, it's not like unemployment's 10% right now. Historically, we have very low unemployment. So if it is the case that these AIs are going to throw a bunch of people out of work, but by boosting overall productivity such that we have a bigger pie that we could afford to just give these people enough to live on, even though they're not working.
Right.
Let's wait till we're in that situation before we do that. Because right now, we don't have this extra huge pie to give to people, and they're not being thrown out of work because the unemployment rate's so low.
And you mentioned about billionaires advocating this. And I think that's interesting too, because I know a few billionaires. Well, I know Charles Koch, and I don't think he's subject to this problem, but many billionaires I read what they say, the Mark Cubans of the world and so on. I think because they've been wealthy for so long, they've kind of lost touch with some of these issues. Like, and I even see it in my own life. Like, we're putting our wills together, and I realize I literally don't ever have to work again in my life. I still want to, but I don't have to. And so people's grocery bills go up, and I hear lower income friends talking about it, and I'm not even aware of it. Like, okay, we want that, we buy it, and I'm still saving each month, out of my freelance income. And so, I just think we're less sensitive. I'm counting myself with billionaires.
You and the billionaires, you and Elon.
We're less sensitive to those things, and I think it can give them a sense of reality. I think what keeps me grounded is I'm not that far from it. I have, neighbors who are in very different, in much more modest circumstances than I am, and I talk to them. And so it just there's an air of unreality often that comes out of billionaires.
Well, also too, I wonder if some of it is. I'm not questioning anybody's sincerity. Like it might be
right,
but is a sort of thing that if you're a billionaire, especially if you own a company and you're going to be like mass producing these robots and whatever that might throw people out of work, it's pretty good PR for you to say, oh, I'm happy to be taxed extra to pay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
in other words, if they're looking ahead and saying, oh, yeah, if I'm at that point a quadrillionaire and I have millions of robots that do most of the manual tasks on planet Earth, and they grow the food and build the apartment complexes and maintain, the data centers for all the VR stuff, that, I'm happy to give a portion of that to support all the millions of people who now just sit in their apartments downloading content all day. Sure.
Right,
and,
right.
Because that's how benevolent I am. You know what I mean? Like, otherwise, people might want to come and take my fortune from me if they think that I'm going to ruin society. So I can see there'd be an element of that.
Yeah. And the other thing is people's wants expand with what's available. And so there's this idea, that there's no real minimum that people they'll just say, okay, I'm fine with that. And I think back to an essay by John Maynard Keynes you're probably familiar with about the economic possibilities for our grandchildren, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
In which he said with this kind of growth rate that was plausible, and it was plausible, it kind of did happen, people wouldn't have to work more than 15 hours a week. Well, yeah, if what they wanted was the consumption bundle that people had in the 1940s.
Right.
But we want our widescreen TVs. Okay, here's another change in my adult life. When I was in my 20s and someone got married, there was a bachelor party at someone's place. And if they sprung for it, this was not my taste, they had a stripper. Okay? Not what I wanted, but that was their deal. Now, people have destination bachelor parties because they can fly to Vegas, or if they live in Boston, they flew to Montreal and so on. And it's like, that just shows people want more. And I'm not blaming them. Good for them. But it's just like there are all these things we want, and that minimum won't do it. It won't come close.
I can remember going along with what you're saying, my first vehicle that my parents got me was a Ford Ranger, and it didn't have air conditioning, but I was in upstate New York, and it was like, if it's in the summer, I just drive with the windows down, problem solved. Right. And now I can't imagine not having air conditioning in my car. Like, that would be inconceivable.
Right. And and you're substantially younger than me, but I lived in Rochester where you grew up. And my first car, which was a lemon, was a 1975 Volkswagen Rabbit. And it didn't, if I recall, I don't think it had air conditioning. I don't think. Anyway, so things have gotten better.
And by the way, when I rolled the window down, I had to do this with my arm.
Yeah, right. Ditto.
And we liked it. Okay, well, we just look at the clock here. We just got a few minutes. So as we're recording this, folks, the State of the Union was last night. So what's any final thoughts for the listeners and your view of the future of America and, I guess the world at large?
Well, I didn't watch it. I recorded it. I always record them in case I hear something I want to just see for myself. Right. Did he really say that? Did other people really react that way? And I'm not there yet. And I might not watch it unless I find something I really want to check. But, okay, so you've known me a long time, Bob, and so I'm a kind of a glass half full person, right? I'm an optimist. My optimism is fairly low for me. It's still higher than most people's, than the average. And it's because I just see all these things that have gotten better, whether it be in healthcare, in what we were talking about with cars and so on. And so, if Biden gets reelected, will we still have economic growth? Yes. If Trump gets elected, will we still have economic growth? Yes. Which one would be higher? I think Trump, but I'm not sure because I'm not sure how serious he is about those tariffs and so on. But anyway, so I think we will have economic growth. Now, if we could just get rid of a whole lot of regulation that are slowing things down, we could have more economic growth. I was visiting with some people at coffee yesterday morning, and we live in coastal California where there's a lot of regulation. And we were talking about, well, can I replace my deck without getting a permit, oh no, you got to get a permit. And it's the same DAC,
Mm-hmm.
And this guy I talked about his thing he's building for his retirement, and the soil person who has to come out can't come out till a year from now to look at it. And so if we could just get rid of a lot of those regulations, we would be way better off.
Well, I think that's something to shoot for. So my guest has been David Henderson. David, thanks so much for your time and your insights.